Kia ora, I'm Marco Fon, and this is Life is Loading, a podcast where we delve into the challenges facing those in the quarter life stage. The midlife crisis. It's the cultural phenomenon we've all heard of, where your dad suddenly buys a Harley Davidson to feel young again. It often hits when a big life shift conjures up some heavy questions. But with the cost of living crisis having reached a new high and many people leaving in droves over the ditch, many are forced to reflect and reevaluate their lives younger and younger. Therefore, a new term has been coined, the quarter life crisis. What we want to do is unpack it further and ask, is it avoidable? How widespread is it? And is it even a term we should be using? I'm joined here with team lead of youth mental health team, Manu Karere at Purapura Whetu, and former president of the New Zealand Association of Counsellors, Sarah Maindonald. Sarah, thank you for joining us on the podcast.
You're welcome.
So firstly, talk us through what traditional life milestones once were and how they've changed over time.
So I think traditional life milestones largely depend on which age bracket you're in. But I guess I was thinking of milestones perhaps for older people would have been your 21st. Like there was often quite a big deal, and you might have been given a key, a metaphorical key to your adult life.
Of course.
And often people were thinking that they might be married with children, in their 20s.
Yeah.
It was quite common.
So are the milestones actually a valid metric to measure the success of someone's life?
Well, I think they're very defined by people's values. So if you're valuing interdependence or independence, that might very much, colour your view of somebody staying at home till they're 25. Some people think, they should have been out, launched. And yet for other people, culturally, that would be quite normal for people to be at home perhaps till they're married or, not a big deal in an extended family.
What do you think culturally sets those things apart, whether people dictate, should you be at this stage of your life? What sorts of aspects do you think go into that?
I guess people's personal belief systems, we're driven by lots of messages about money, about consumerism, about what a good life looks like. Often they're misleading because there's lots of research that shows actually lots and lots of money doesn't necessarily make you happy. Good quality relationships can, and that doesn't just mean intimate relationships.
Yeah, so a UK charity showed that young adults in 1997 on average were already married and living in their own home. However, young adults in 2025 are more likely to be single and living at home with their parents. What do you think is the root cause of that shift?
I think a lot of it is economic. It's much harder, I think, for young people to get employment. I've heard of people with Seek applying on Seek, and there's 200, 300 people applying for the same position. I've had friends with their, late teens, early 20s in that position where they might be quite well qualified and great skills to bring to a job, but just can't get into the job market. I think too, housing, all of those factors play into where people choose to live.
Yeah, so you talk about housing, and also what springs to mind is obviously the cost of living crisis and those sorts of things.
Definitely.
Since COVID, obviously we're improving, hopefully, from then. But what sorts of ways can people navigate those sorts of things if they are trying to, get out of that hole of feeling like they can't get a job or coping?
Sure. I think it's really important to keep socially connected because sometimes those experiences can isolate you, particularly if your peers are all working and you're at home, and keep other interests, keep other things that you're involved with, be it sports or social activities, just anything that will keep you connected with other people. And if you're not coping, get help. It's okay just to reach out.
Of course. Yeah. So another UK national poll showed that women and members of the LGBTQ plus community were disproportionately higher to experience pressure to reach certain life milestones compared to men of the same age. Why do you think that might be?
I'm wondering if it's because despite our society hopefully moving forward in terms of equity, I think there still is different expectations for men and women and minority groups, rainbow communities, ethnic minorities, and maybe there's that pressure to be, what's considered normal in terms of people internalising that. I think there's much more pressure on women, for example, perhaps to have children, people talking about, oh, your time's running out, or, getting to 35, you may not be able to have children, all that kind of pressure.
Yeah, of course. And obviously your work at Purapura Whetu, you probably work alongside Māori and those communities in New Zealand. So what do you notice in terms of trends that you might see with Māori people towards a similar sort of pressure to reach those certain life milestones?
I think that extended whānau, there's often a lot of support. That's a strength, I think, within more collective cultures. I think that racism is a pressure. So people might, in a competitive job market, there might be other narratives that come into play with whether people can find employment or not.
Yeah. So how can they get help with that? How do we progress ourselves so, to try and make these things not happen?
Well, I think collective power is really important.
Yeah.
So having a sense of agency, where you may not have what you wanted in terms of your projected life pathway with employment or a relationship, is to really take heed of the things that are present in your life and to value those people close to you, and just to reach out and get help. Like, surprisingly, there are quite a lot of services that are available and free. Purapura Whetu, where I work, they have 38 services, and the Manukarere is a Te Whatu Ora collaborative. There's 8 different agencies that are part of that, providing free counselling for young people from 13 to 24.
And obviously it's so important that those services are there and in place for people. New Zealand Psychological Society reported having a shortage of staff for several years, and Kiwis struggle to get help fast. So what role could this have in Kiwis avoiding getting professional help?
Oh, definitely a barrier. There's a shortage of counsellors. It's on the green list for immigration, psychologists. There is things like 1737, so there is at least some short-term emotional brief support on, by phone. But yeah, it is definitely an issue. I think that's part of the rationale, anyway, for some of the recent government moves to have an associate psychologist position, because some people will train and choose not to do the clinical psych pathway. But at the same time, it is a bit of a concern because it's only 1 year in terms of then you're, unleashed on the public after you've done a Bachelor of Psychology. So people have mixed ideas about it, but it might increase the psychologist workforce.
Yeah, and obviously those services are so crucial again, and being able to help Kiwis and give them that help that they require is so important. What can we do to break the stigma of Kiwis asking for help? Because obviously if there was a lack of services, but that has been increasing, how do we change the mental state of young Kiwis or just Kiwis in general to help encourage them to take up on these services?
I think just to normalise it, exactly what you're talking about. If we went to a counsellor as much as we might go to a health professional for our physical well-being, people might really be able to, get ahead of some of the difficulties they're having. And I think the problem is that, like our biggest groups, for example, in terms of suicidal risk, are often younger men who might not open up or talk because they think it's not cool, or they think they need to sort it all out by themselves. So I guess if we can just really give those messages, it's okay. Everybody can go through phases of not feeling great, but it's not forever. I think that's the difficult thing is sometimes people internalise that they think it's their fault, that they're not measuring up, they're not good enough, they're not lovable, they're not worth anything. And so that internal sort of feeling takes over their thinking.
Do you think that internal feeling of not being able to ask for help, it's somewhat contradictory with what we were speaking on earlier about how there may not be that many services that are known to people? Would that play a factor in how they feel asking for help?
I think so. I think probably the peer pressures and the normalising of reaching out for help is the bigger issue. So yeah, I guess that's up to all of us as a community to notice when people are not okay and ask the question. And in every workplace, if every workplace had on their wall some phone numbers to reach out for help and just, normalise people's stories, that would be wonderful.
So considering all of these factors, is reaching those traditional milestones, whatever they may look like, is that still achievable for people?
Definitely. I think what's happened is that over time, it's not the milestones perhaps that have changed, but the timing. So some younger people I spoke with, they said, well, we don't feel that pressure to partner and have kids in our 20s. It's more about getting an education and getting a good job. So I think all of those expectations can be present, but just at different stages. And I think too, it's just really important to realise that not everyone can do this, one size fits all pathway to life.
Of course.
And that, it takes a diverse community to actually create a good life and for everybody.
For sure. And this is where this term sort of quarter life crisis is coming from. You usually hear of stories of your parents or your dad might have a midlife crisis. Yeah, as you say. And that's more of, he might go and buy a new boat. But with these quarter life crisis feelings that Kiwis might be feeling, are they allowed to use that term? Is it something that is actually, I wouldn't say an excuse, but a reason as to why they're feeling these feelings?
I was reflecting on that. Is this a helpful term? And part of me thinks, well, maybe not, because it sort of encourages people to think, oh, am I in a crisis when I can't measure up to these things? Whereas I think there's life transitions, and I think that kind of notion can perhaps normalise this. At the same time, if someone is in crisis and they happen to be 25 or around about their age, I guess it might encourage them to think, oh, well, I'm not alone. But I think we've just got to be careful that we don't sort of sensationalise crises all the time because we've got quite a vulnerable mental health in Aotearoa, and it's sort of like we need to create some positive narratives about people's coping and ability to enjoy life, without a $100,000 salary, without, your perfect house or perfect children.
So, Sarah, you talk about the quarter life crisis kind of being this term that may or may not be able to be used in the sense that we're trying to encourage people to help themselves. But is the feeling actually avoidable? And are there preemptive measures that somebody could take that you would recommend?
I guess as a counsellor, I think all feelings are, acceptable. And if you're feeling, like pressured by 25, not that you haven't got these things achieved, then those feelings are real. I guess it's like how we choose to think about those things, or if we can get people to help us think differently about where we're up to or what supports we need, that's sort of more, I think, important.
Certainly. Do you think those sorts of things or those challenges that the generation, say 35 to 44-year-olds are feeling, do you think that those challenges reflect on the younger generation and impact how their lives pan out and what sort of challenges they face?
I think we're all interconnected. We can be influenced by something in our workplace, which can either be uplifting or not. We can be influenced by someone in our family that's having a hard time. So I think that, like if families under stress, young people associated with those families are symptomatic sometimes of that distress. Certainly with teenagers, that I deal with quite a lot. That's very evident. There's life events that happen, and you've only got to have 2 or 3 of those, and then parents lost a job, or someone passes away, or there's a major illness to deal with. You've only got to have 2 or 3 of those, and it does impact on people's well-being.
So those phases of life you're sort of talking about, and kind of going from childhood to adulthood to having a family and those sorts of things, anxieties that are attributed around those, is that because more of a lack of support, say in New Zealand, or is that because of what they're going through, they might not be able to, say, reach out and find people?
I think it's multifaceted. So I guess a lot of our thinking does drive our emotions and our behaviour, but some of that is internal and some of that's external, and some of it's influenced by social factors, housing, employment, nutrition. There's a lot of evidence now around, food is medicine. So if you can't afford a decent diet, it could well impact on your well-being. So I think, there's multiple factors.
And it's not to be underestimated at all. No, you're absolutely right. I might ask you a personal question here, if that's all right, Sarah. Did you feel like in your 30s, did you face some of these challenges we've been talking about, and how did you overcome it, or how would you approach it differently if given a second chance?
I don't mind sharing. I think I had my first child at 29, and I do remember hitting my 30s and thinking, is this it?
Yeah.
And it was no reflection on the people around me, but I guess I did. I had the internalized sort of tick, and then it's saying, oh gosh, is this my identity? And so it's sort of like, I think those pressures defined the choices I made, but actually there was more to it in terms of actually finding satisfaction with my life. I think what I would have liked more was perhaps that there were multiple narratives about how you can have a successful life, that you don't have to be married with children, you don't have to be, shouldn't say it, but you don't have to be working actually, could be doing things that are really productive and contributing without necessarily, aiming for a huge pay packet, although you almost have to have that to survive. But I think if the skills for coping with transitions had been more an integral part of learning, like young people now, if their schools embraced it, they will have, they'll be learning about mindfulness, they'll be learning about haora and well-being. They will have a much higher awareness than certainly people in my age group in terms of school.
Of course, and you talk about that narrative, obviously, becoming a parent yourself and how that shouldn't have defined who you were at that time. And you also touched on schools embracing those sorts of ways that they can help show people that might not be the case. What do you think could be done differently in those schools to help show people, if you do have a child young, say, it's not the narrative of that defines who you are?
A lot about it is the messages that we give out, the adults. We've got to be really careful, I think, about making sort of totalising judgments about people and always saying their potential. I've been aware of some young Pacifica people at a certain high school in Christchurch who were told that they wouldn't amount to anything. So some really damning comments that might have been said in a teacher's, just one moment, but actually can be very impactful for a young person.
Yeah, it can be. And obviously you have people come to you, specifically in the service that Purapura Whetu offer. Do you feel like that the advice that you're generally giving is help changing that narrative, and those sorts of things should be embraced by other places?
There's definitely research that shows that counselling is effective in changing people's, supporting people's wellbeing and mental health. There was research done with the Ministry of Education and the New Zealand Association of Counsellors around 50 different schools in the country. So that was particularly adolescents. I think there's lots of, there's a difference between, I guess, more severe mental health issues where people might need really specialised help or specialist mental health services. However, I remember talking to a colleague who was a psychiatrist in youth mental health, and she said many of the presentations are about social distress. So they're people that have got isolated, have internalised really negative things about themselves and just haven't had that ability, resilience or support to actually change course.
So for those people who, that they come from a household that might have two parents, and the parents could be really open with them talking about those sorts of issues, what sorts of things for younger people who might not have those key people in their lives, such as two parents, whether that's at a youth stage or whether they're growing up, how can those conversations sort of happen in a natural way outside of your family?
Well, I guess counselling is a place that can hopefully be a safe, trusted adult that you can talk with. I'd like to not normalise a two-parent family, because sometimes if those parents are fighting hard out, then it's not necessarily easy for young people to get their needs met around support. But I think there's lots of parents that are parenting alone or with extended family support are actually doing a great job. I guess making sure that your young person's not isolated, if you can try and build a community of people around them, so they've got a number of adults that they could model off or have connection with and talk to. I think that's really helpful. Not always that easy, but I think it's almost what's modelled is okay. You can go and ask, your auntie, or you can go and talk to my friend Sally or whatever.
Yeah, nice. And lastly, Sarah, do you think there's, if you had to give somebody one piece of advice that we may not have covered already, what would that be if they are facing some of these challenges in their life, whether that be in the quarter life stage or whether that be at any point?
I think that we all go through times where we will question our worth, we'll question if we are lovable or worthy, those are actually core messages that we often grow up with a bit of a question around, just not through anyone's fault, but just because of events that might have happened. So I guess for people to think these are transitory moments, and sometimes it can feel like maybe a year and it's huge. You feel like, oh, my whole life's over. But as for people just to hang in there and to seek help, because life is always in flux. There's a beautiful model called Tihe Wa Mauri Ora that's a therapeutic model, but based on traditional Māori knowledge that talks about going from te pō to te kore into te ao marua. So going from a place of darkness, but that also is full of potential. So it's kind of like that life is about flux, and we might get stuck in a moment and thinking that's all of our life. But if we just keep going, we can see there might be other things that happen that change our reality.
Awesome. What a lovely analogy, Sarah. Thank you so much for sharing that.
That's by Taina Piripi and Vivian Body.
Well, thank you so much for joining me on the Life is Loading podcast today. It's been a pleasure to talk to you, Sarah.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's it for this episode of Life is Loading. This podcast is part of the Kokako Network. It was produced by Marcus Allen, Alexandra Bogdanova, and Alice Homer. It was edited by Dom Hamilton with graphics by Anaya Pasha and Ella Dickens, and technical support from Kit Williams. For more content from Kokako, head to our website kokako.media or catch us live on 96.1 and Channel 200.